Writing. This is what I was going to tell you about. This, I've got the original of this. It's about 4 by 3, but I've sort of blown it down. This is the poster that was put up in Chaplin's window to say, do you own the 1 millionth Wainwright? If so, you get these awards. And I've got the original of that on my little wall. This was a funny story, which I only discovered recently. If all of you say you read the book, I have this photograph early doors, as we say in football, and I said it's A.W. and Henry Marshall plus an unknown woman, blah blah. So it's a funny photograph because Wainwright is wearing, as most people did from Lancashire in those days, a knotted hanky on his head for the heat. Can you see him? So it's a funny photograph. Henry Marshall, so it was vital to have a photograph of Henry Marshall. But the woman, who looks like a young-looking woman of 30, it looks like a 1930s photograph. I didn't really know who she was, so hence I called it Unknown Photograph, Unknown Woman. A couple of years ago, I got a letter from her to say, I'm the unknown woman in the photograph. And she sent me some details of how she came to be in that photograph. What happened was, she's called Mary Helps, H-E-L-P-S, and she was on her honeymoon in 1954 on the island of Skye, and she was in a hotel in Sligachen, is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah.
And also there was Mr. Wainwright, his friend Mr. Marshall, and she says a third man was with them, whose only name, she can only remember his name was Colin. I've never discovered who the third chum was, called Colin. So they're all in this B&B place, this little hotel, and like when you're on holiday in these places in the Lake District, you all go off your different ways at the end of the evening. You say, how did you get on? Did you climb so-and-so? What was it like? And you all boast, don't you, how far you got. So the three men had gone out one day to climb Spurnagillin. Is that right?
Spurnagillin.
Well done. Yeah. So only Colin had succeeded. She remembered this, and she wrote me this letter. This is a letter that Mary Helps wrote to me, going back on those memories of 50-odd years ago. The following day, in perfect weather conditions, we ourselves set off to climb the mountain. That's Mary Helps and the bloke she just married. And on our way across the glen, we overtook Mr. Wainwright and Mr. Marshall, disappointed at our failure the previous day and determined to succeed on this their second attempt. We proceeded on our way, reached the col and left our rucksacks there, and scrambled up the final ascent. It was a memorable achievement. We then returned to the ridge and were having our lunch when Mr. Wainwright and Mr. Marshall appeared. We were able to reassure them that the final ascent was possible and offered to escort them ourselves. The four of us reached the summit successfully, so she'd gone back up to take them, and it was then that my husband took the photograph. They were, of course, delighted to get there and declared it was the highlight of the holiday. On the way down, they told us that they were just beginning to discover the delights of fell walking in the Lake District. This is 1954. Subsequently, we sent them a copy of the photograph, and a few months later, Mr. Marshall wrote to tell us that he had published Mr. Wainwright's first guide to the Eastern Fells, and would we like a copy? And so we have it today, a first edition, with an accompanying note from the author, now one of our treasured possessions. The fascination about that letter is, well, she identifies herself, so when we reprint, and the book is out of print, the Wainwright books, it'll be out again for his centenary in January. So the thing about that letter is, it proves, not to prove, it's another evidence that he wasn't an expert climber. I had lots of trouble with various people in that first edition, in the biography, when Harry Griffin rubbishes Wainwright's climbing prowess. But Wainwright never pretended to be a climber. He couldn't manage gates or things. He was a walker. Second thing it proves, in those days, 1954, you could leave your rucksack and your lunch on a fell, and nobody would nick it. So that's that to see. And then there's another letter there, if you want to read it, which is, she then wrote to him again in 1986, years and years later, going over the memories and congratulating him on his, she hadn't been in contact for 30 years. And Wainwright writes a very nice letter back to her in 1986, say yes, so you can read that letter. These are two letters when I went to see Wainwright myself, and two little letters from him One, it's a very short one saying, I actually can't remember what I said to him. It said, "It's a pleasure. It was when I was trying to interview him. But why a London address when Lakeland is at its enchanting best?" I forgot to tell you, but this is in the book, that actually I had interviewed Wainwright in 1977 for my walk around the Lake District book. And I'd written to him because I was doing this book and I was interviewing people and talking to people like Joss Naylor and lots of other people. And he turned me down originally, and I eventually said, I promised him I would only use any interview which he could read in the book. I wouldn't do it in a newspaper or in a magazine, because in the mid-70s he was still keeping a very low profile. He hadn't started his big colour books. So I spent 4 hours with him in his house at Kendall Green. I was a bit disappointed by the house. I thought it was going to be, it's a modern architect design house, very handsome. But I thought it would be bijou and pretty and lovely, like Roger's and my house, and roses round the door. During those 4 hours, the telephone went constantly, and he never answered it. In fact, he seemed to be unaware of the telephone ringing. Betty, his second wife, whom he'd married in some years earlier, was out. I remember him moaning on because that day he'd just heard that the pint of beer at that pub at Twice Brewed. Well, where's the end of the Pennine Way? That pub where he's something up. Anyway, he, in a flash moment when he did the Pennine Way, he said, "Whoever finishes the Pennine Way, they can have a drink, half pint, on my bill if they finish the route, and I will pay it." So early on, of course, just a few people, but as the flood of people, he was paying out hundreds. And that day, the price of beer had gone up, and he was moaning about it. I went with Betty, came back, and I found out she was hanging some drawings by him at Abbott Hall. I think it was the book about Kendall, and he was giving the proceeds to charity, but they were selling the prints, not the prints, the original artwork, for £10 each. Can you imagine this? So I went along and I bought 3 of them, and I got my checkbook out and was writing A. Wainwright. Betty said, "Oh, no, not that. A. Animal Rescue." And it was only then that I discovered, which nobody outside Betty and Wainwright himself, and obviously the Animal Rescue, nobody knew he was giving every penny away from his books and his drawings to this animal rescue place. He kept it totally quiet.